Good evening. Welcome to the October 2nd, 2023 Cabarrus County Board of Education work session. I'd like to recognize our Teacher of the Year, Ms. Carrie Fugel, our board members Brian Floyd, Sam Treadaway, Keisha Sandage, our Superintendent, Dr. John Kopicki, our Vice Chair, Rob Walters, our board members Laura Lindsay, Pam Escobar, our Attorney Gil Middlebrooks, and our board clerk, Christy Spade. We will move to 1.01. We'll call this meeting to order. We'll move to 2.01. Please stand with me as we do the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We'll move to 3.01, where we will adopt the agenda. Board members, I need a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
So moved.
I need a second.
Second.
I have a motion by Ms. Lindsay, a second by, was it Mr. Treadaway or Mr. Floyd? Okay, Mr. Floyd, thank you. Is there any discussion about the agenda, board members? All those in favor of approving the agenda for the October 2nd, 2023 work session, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The agenda is approved. We will move to 4.01 board chair comments. Board members, we need to approve the 2023 North Carolina School Board Association delegates who will vote for our district during their annual conference in November. These are the 4 board members that have stepped up. They are Pam Escobar, Sam Treadaway, Rob Walter, and myself, Denise Adcock. Is there any discussion about this, board members? Okay, so those will be our voting delegates for the 2023 annual conference. We'll move to 4.02 with superintendent comments with Dr. John Kopicki.
Thank you, Mrs. Adcock. First thing I want to do is I want to clarify something for our community and to let them understand the timeline on this so that we're all on the same page in terms of our realignment discussion. I want to be very clear that what's taking place. Right now we've received several hundred applications for participation in our focus group, which I appreciate, and I think that's fantastic that our community wants to be involved in this. The deadline for that is this Friday. So the community focus group for the realignment process is one component of the overall community engagement strategy. As we stated at our September board meeting, the intent is to bring together various stakeholders representing different perspectives throughout the school district. Members will serve in an advisory role, and I want to emphasize advisory role. They're going to give us their advice and their insights as to what they see. The decision makers ultimately are going to be the board. We're going to take that advice and the advisory components that they provide for us, along with the inter-district committee, and obviously the insights of Dr. Bowers, Tim Lauder, Brian Cohen, and others that are involved in this realignment process, bringing it all together, working with cooperative strategies, and we will make those appropriate recommendations to the board. Ultimately, I want to be very clear. Even as an administrator, even as a superintendent, technically I'm in an advisory role. I'm going to give the board the recommendations that they need to make I'm going to give them the information in my recommendation that I believe is the right way to go for the district, but ultimately it will be the board that makes the final decision. We are all in advisory roles, and our job is to advise the board and give them the information they need to make the most informed vote that they can make. So I want to be clear as to what it is we're asking of people and what those roles are. And to even understand as superintendent, I'm technically in an advisory role as well. I give the board the information. The board ultimately has the final say and makes those decisions. So those community focus group applications close this Friday, October 6th at 5 o'clock. The application can be found on our district website. And if you just look at the website, it'll guide you to the application you can apply. And again, we've had several hundred people from our community apply to this. So that's great. How that's going to work is, I want to be real clear about this. There's going to be teachers and there's going to be parents on that committee, as well as other community officials. It could be elected official, it could be a community representative from an organization, the Chamber of Commerce, Rotaries, whatever it may be, people that are involved in the community have a good knowledge base of the community and some history that's tied to that as well to help us make good decisions when we try and make decisions in the realignment process. Those community folks will be selected by me and my assistants in the district, my cabinet folks. We'll reach out to those people. So you have 2 community focus groups of 25 people. Our goal is to balance those out and put about 12 to 15 people from the teachers and parents and about 10 people from the community on each group. So in reality, you're looking at about 20 to 30 people from the community focus, from the community that's applying, teachers and parents, that'll sit on these community groups. And one of the things that we're emphasizing is we are going to take all the applications and break them down by feeder pattern. So there'll be a Central Cabarrus feeder pattern, there'll be a West Cabarrus feeder pattern, there'll be a Hickory Ridge feeder pattern, there'll be a J.M. Robinson feeder pattern. We're going to break the feeder patterns down by high schools. So we'll separate the applications out that way, and then we'll take those applications and we'll do a blind draw and pick about 8 to 14 representatives from the high schools of parents and teachers, so that we balance it out that way, so that it's a cross-section representation of the entire district. It's not just lumped, it's not just one group of people, that it covers everyone. And then we're going to look at the community representation. We've started to reach out to some community members. We should have that list finalized by the end of the week, and we'll balance that and put those 2 community focus groups together. I anticipate this community focus group will be formed and finished by next Monday. I want to have total commitments from everybody. We will post those community focus groups on our website for all to see who's on it. And the meetings will be on there. They may already be on there. I know that Dr. Bowers has placed updates regularly on the CCS Engage site. If not, we can put the timeline on there for what those community focus groups will be. They have not changed with the exception of we just moved the September meeting. All the other timelines are the same as they have been forever. So when you get on the website and you look at the timeline of events that are supposed to happen, they are the same as they've always been with the exception of moving the September meeting up into the October schedule, if I'm correct on that. So that has been there for everyone to see. And then we will then add who are on these groups on the website as well, so all the public will see that. The first community focus groups meetings are going to be held October 11th. And then we will update the board on a regular basis as to what has taken place there and what occurred. We had a inter-district meeting this past week with cooperative strategies that went very well. And what they did is they kind of went over the they went over the feeder patterns, kind of gave us the geographic location of where the schools sit, what some of the hot zones were, what some of the issues may be, and some of the things that they were looking at. No decisions were made. It was informational only. And as we get closer to November, December, and gather all this information and give it to the board, we'll keep everybody in the community informed. So I just want to be very clear about how this process is working. If there are any questions, anybody's confused and doesn't understand how this is working, I'm encouraging you to reach out to my office and ask to speak to me, because I'll be the one that'll be able to explain this to you best. And then it's just one voice telling you the answers as to what we're doing. It's not several people giving you responses. So I ask anyone that's not sure as to what the process is to reach out to my office, and my executive assistant will definitely get in touch with me, and I'll get back to you ASAP. But I will say, so far we've had no issues. Our community has been very responsive and engaged and active in applying, and we welcome that, and we're kind of excited about having that many applications because people are interested in this. So I'll keep you all posted on that. Futures Fair. The Cabarrus County Schools Future Fair is going to be held at the Cabarrus Arena on Monday, October 16th from 6 to 8 p.m. The Futures Fair will combine our Program Choice Fair, our College Fair, and our Career Fair into one event. Last year's inaugural Futures Fair was informative for our families and well attended, and we'll hope you join us on October the 16th. Lastly, just an update. I'm not going to get into specifics, but as you know, the state budget was approved by the legislature on October 2nd. It became law, which is today. And DPI is in the process of sending us the appropriate information to all of us in regards to the salary variations and what that means for our staff. I do anticipate by the end of the month, finance will be adjust it, and we'll make the appropriate adjustments as to what those raises will be for our teachers. So more to come in the future on that. But we'll have detailed communication to all of our staff once that budget officially gets the information from DPI to us. We'll make sure our staff has all that. But we're targeting October 31st for the payroll for new salaries to go into effect. So every employee in the District of Cabarrus County should have their new salaries in play October 31st. The retro pay will be in the November 30th payroll. So new salaries are going to play October 31st. The retro pay, that anyone has retro pay, that'll go into play November 30th payroll. And if there are any questions on that, I would ask you to reach out to Finance and call them. And I want to thank Finance because it's a pretty big job to take care of 4,000 employees and do the work that they're doing. But they're doing a good job on this, so we want to make sure we communicate that out to everyone. Last two things is I want to thank Lilly Corporation. Last week they conducted their Global Day of Service. I'm sure many of you saw some of the pictures that we sent out to you about their helping beautify some of our schools. We appreciate that. They did a lot of weeding, mulching, and planting trees and shrubs, and kind of interacting with our administrators and our students and being a part of the community as they start to settle in here and become part of us. But they did a great job, and it was a really fun day, and we appreciate the support. And again, it speaks to the strong communities make strong schools. So we do appreciate the help that they gave us. And then lastly, there was a recent bill that was passed. It's called House Bill 8. And through this new law, computer science is going to be added to the English, math, arts, science, and social studies requirements for high school graduation in North Carolina. North Carolina is going to become the 8th state to require a computer science course upon graduation. In passing this law, they're recognizing the needs of the 21st century students and graduates. And the Department of Instruction believes they've been ahead of the curve with this new institution of this new law. The computer science, IT, and technology education discipline within the CTE focuses on building linkages in computer science occupations for entry-level technical and professional careers related to the design, development, support, and management of hardware, software, and multimedia and systems integration services. So what that means is that the computer science and IT and tech education is going to be a discipline that's going to be focused on the understanding of certain skill sets and pathways the students should experience before they graduate in North Carolina. We're waiting on the Department of Instruction to kind of give us a little further guidance on how this is going to be implemented, but we do anticipate it's going to be a course requirement that our kids are going to all have to complete before they graduate. And this will come into effect officially in the 2026-27 school year. So more to come on that, and as that gets pushed out from the DPI offices, we'll make sure we keep everyone up to date on that. But that was recently passed, and I just wanted to make sure we made the board aware of that. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Kopicki. We'll move to 4.03, our attorney comments with Mr. Gil Middlebrooks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to follow up from Dr. Kopicki with one matter that was contained in the budget. As we forecast, the budget did contain a provision that delayed the implementation date of the Parents' Bill of Rights until the first Monday after New Year's. So we have time to work through that in a more deliberate fashion, and most importantly, DPI and the state board has the time to do their part, which flows down to the district's part. Another positive change that was made in the Budget Act relating to the Parents' Bill of Rights was to clarify one of the issues that all of us had raised about the health care services provision and consent. The budget makes it clear that consent does not have to be, it is not a new requirement for the existing services that are already provided for in statute. So for instance, we all had a question about whether we had to get prior consent for first aid now. That has never been the case, and the budget made it clear that it continues to not be the case. So that healthcare consent requirement becomes much more manageable from a school perspective. That's all I've got. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. We will move to 5.01, our program choice programmatic review updates with Ms. Sarah Reeves and Ms. Heather Stowe. Welcome, ladies.
Good evening, Madam Chair, Dr. Kopicki, and members of the board. Thank you all so much for allowing us to present this evening on our programmatic review for the fall of 2023. With me this evening, I am proud to present Ms. Heather Stowe. We are extremely blessed that she has been joining our team and coming to us as a district administrator, so just providing some great context and a lens of support as we begin the programmatic review process.
Thank you for having me.
So as we begin, one of the things that we would really like to point out is that a part of Destination 2025, we want to be very clear that as a priority 2 in teaching and learning, it is critical for us to go back and reevaluate the many programs that we have available in this county. It is a tremendous source of pride for our community, but we also want to make sure that we are consistently going back and reviewing programmatically where there are opportunities for growth, as well as where there are opportunities for duplication or potentially expansion of promising practices or best practices that are happening around our community. As you may remember, last spring we came to you with our first round of programmatic review. This is our second phase. Our ultimate goal is to make sure that we share with the community what programmatic offerings are available, what the data is showing, as well as surveying and soliciting parent and community and stakeholder feedback around these programs so that we can continue to grow as a community in the programmatic areas that we find to be very successful, and then we actually evaluate and make recommendations where we see fit, where there may be growth opportunities. So as you see here, one of our biggest priorities this year for the fall of 2023 was specifically looking at the program of balanced calendar, our virtual academy in grades 1st through 5th grade. This was a continuation of the programmatic review that we did last spring, in addition to our dual language immersion elementary schools. So those are the programs that we reviewed this fall, and we're excited to share with you what our findings were.
The particular schools that we looked at for balanced calendar was Wolf Meadow. For CVA, it was the Cabarrus Virtual Academy. And then for our dual language immersion, we looked at Mandarin and Spanish. Those affected schools for this round were Cox Mill Elementary School for Mandarin, Harrisburg Elementary School for Mandarin, Carl A. Furr Elementary for Spanish, Rocky River Elementary for Spanish, Weinkauf Elementary for Spanish, W.M. Irvin Elementary for Spanish, and Wolf Meadow Elementary School for Spanish. The programmatic review process and timeline is as follows. In August of this year, we met with our programmatic review principals, and we had a meeting kind of laying out exactly what we would be doing. We talked about how we would be generating parent surveys for each of the different programs, as well as staff surveys that they would have to share amongst their community. Principals presented those surveys to their parents between August 30th and September 15th. They announced those through our parent square to let parents know that the surveys were open, as well as talked about these surveys in their SIT meetings and in their staff meetings. After all of the data was collected, what we did as a district team is we met to discuss the programmatic recommendations after we put all of the data together. And then we presented those recommendations to our principals 2 weeks ago, as well as allowed for them to ask any questions or any concerns that they would have of the data. We generated slides for them specifically so that they can all be able to communicate the same type of information to all of their parents and their staff. Last week, between September 25th and September 29th, principals were to have meetings with their staff and with their community to kind of let them know what the programmatic recommendations were from the county. Here we are today to meet with you all to let you know exactly what that process was as far as the timeline, and then public comment will be for next week. It was very important for us to get stakeholder feedback. Again, we sent out staff surveys. We sent out parent surveys through Parent Square in both Spanish and English. The results of the programmatic review was shared with staff as well as with parents, and they were shared the results through community meetings that were sponsored by the administrators.
And I will say we got a lot of really positive feedback from this process, specifically from, we've never actually had the opportunity to review how are our dual language classrooms doing in early literacy in comparison to our neighborhood classrooms. What does it look like from attendance and specifically breakdown of the students that we are serving? So I think all of our stakeholders very much appreciated the thoroughness of the data that was presented.
Outside of the parent data, Carl did an amazing job of giving us an overview of data from our schools. He provided us with the overall school performance data, demographics data by program. We looked at amplified data, which looked at the school community, so those that are in the school that were in the programs versus those that were not. Reading EOG scores, math EOG scores, science EOGs, as well as absence breakdown. For our specific DLI schools, we looked at our Apple data through the North Carolina Department of Instruction. Students take 2 tests, one in 2nd grade and one in 5th grade. In 2nd grade, you look at the interpersonal speaking and listening, and then in 5th grade, you look at the speaking and listening, the presentational writing, the interpretive reading, and the interpretive listening. And all of this was included in the slides that were presented to staff and parents.
So here are some of the highlights of the programmatic findings. I will say there was a whole lot more than can fit on one slide, but some of the things that really came out to us that were very loud and clear. The first of which was when we were looking specifically at the balanced calendar. So as you know, Wolf Meadow Elementary actually has 2 programs. They have both balanced calendar and dual language immersion. Specifically, when we were looking at the balanced calendar, the high absenteeism rates at Wolf Meadow was significant, enough to note, moving from a daily average attendance of about 91.5%. And so that is significantly lower than any of our other elementary schools in the district right now. I think it's also really important to note that though that daily average attendance was significantly higher on days when Cabarrus County Schools was out of school and Wolf Meadow was in school. So that was just an important piece of data to note. Additionally, we had over 145 students opted out of Wolf Meadow Elementary School. So 53 of those were hardships, many of which were based on the balanced calendar, and then additional 69 were other students choosing to go to other programs that were not balanced calendar. So that was a significant finding in our programmatic review process. Additionally, I think it was also important to note that a large percent of the participation of our staff surveyed for balanced calendar were actually for balanced calendar. So that was another data finding that did come out of the programmatic review. In terms of dual language, very, very promising data here, specifically as it relates to student achievement, with 95% of our dual language programs meeting or outperforming their school community. And as Ms. Stowe spoke to, that was really taking in comparison students within that school and in that population, teachers within that same professional learning community. What was the data subset for the students that were in a language immersion program? Additionally, school absences met or were lower than the school community in our DLI program. So a lot of the data that we were finding in our elementary programs actually supported both the state and the national average. So we felt very, very good and confident that those programs very much are following the national trend and what we know research says about immersion programs. The other piece was definitely a large support and participation specifically within our Mandarin programs in terms of parent feedback that just very much appreciated the program, were very strong proponents of having that program in their schools. And last but not least, through the Virtual Academy, which was the last programmatic theme that we evaluated, specifically what we saw were declining or decreasing enrollment trends, specifically as it related to parents that selected this as a programmatic theme that they were interested in in the elementary level. And then, of course, when we're looking specifically at student achievement data, a decrease in EOG proficiency in 5th grade. So again, those were the biggest highlights that I would say that came out of the programmatic review process. And one of the things that we wanted to be very clear about was that we were looking at a multifaceted approach in how we made programmatic decisions as it related to next steps for the 2024-2025 school year. Intentionally, we wanted to make sure that we were looking holistically at both what the perception data was of our community and our families and also our staff, but we want to be very clear that that was not the only driving force behind the recommendation. So in some instances, there may be perception data that was in very strong support, but the raw statistical data did not support that the program was either supporting student achievement or that we had other data points based on enrollment, attendance, etc., that may cause us to make a decision contrary to what some people may have said in their feedback. So the other thing that we wanted to make sure was that as we're doing programmatic review, that we're not sounding the alarms to our community every time we're asking for a survey around a program. I think it's really important that this become embedded as a part of our culture, that just the same way that we look at continuous school improvement, continuous district improvement, we need to be looking at continuous program choice improvement. And so all of our programs are funded locally. We do not receive state money to run our program choice, so we need to be really intentional that we're getting the return on investment in these programs and that we're intentionally using data to drive the decision-making process. So I imagine as we go on, hopefully this becomes a culture of what we do and that families understand that this is simply to get their feedback on how their experience has been having a child enrolled in a program choice school. As we look forward to the 24-25 school year, the first recommendation that we will be making is actually that we are not only supporting the Spanish DLI schools, but we will actually be moving to a 90-10 instructional model for those schools. This is specifically because this is not only what research supports, but we firmly believe that we're going to see even greater academic gains when our students are fully immersed in the language. And this is a movement that is happening both nationally and across the state. So we're seeing a lot of schools moving to this model specifically because we know the importance of immersion and exposure in the early childhood years. We have a couple of site visits scheduled for our teachers and administrators to go see schools that have had really successful implementations of this model. We feel like we need to let our families know that we're shifting to this model so that if they want to make a different decision, that they obviously have the right to do so. However, we are going to be sharing the data and the research that supports this instructional model. Our first and second grade students will stay in what we call a maintenance year. So obviously as we transition this up, this would be a rolling process for our families. And specifically making sure that for folks to kind of understand what this would look like, students would receive a full instructional day in Spanish, and then really your encore or your special area is where that 10% of English instruction comes from during the instructional model in kindergarten for our DLI classrooms starting next year. Questions? Awesome. The next piece would be transitioning Cabarrus Virtual Academy to a 6 through 12 program. So you may have heard our conversations from last spring when we talked about reevaluating elementary. We felt like at that time we really needed some more data sets to be able to make an informed decision. Right now this actually would impact about 25 students, specifically thinking about the matriculation of students that will be transitioning from 5th to 6th grade, and then of course we do not have kindergarten this year. There's been multiple data sets to support this, but specifically we're seeing a movement across the state and across the nation away from virtual programming, specifically at the elementary level. Last spring I spoke to some of the challenges just even within the state assessment platforms and the need for students to be face-to-face to be able to assess on some of those core foundational skills in the early years. I will say that Ms. Short has done a phenomenal job working with those families. We want to make sure that each of our families understands what options are available to them, but also understanding the fiscal resources and the challenges as it relates to allotments. With only 25 students, to run a really strong, highly effective program is incredibly challenging, and we want to make sure that the programs that we do offer provide those comprehensive supports that we can provide our families. Additionally, our third recommendation will be transitioning Wolf Meadow Elementary from a balanced calendar and dual language school to a dual language school. We firmly believe that the data set specifically around chronic absenteeism and student performance and achievement results have provided the really strong foundational basis to make a data-informed decision to meet the unique needs of this specific situation. And then last but not least, the last two programmatic recommendations are not anything that we would recommend moving on right now. They're just things that we felt very strongly based on the data we needed to consider moving into the future. And certainly monitoring and evaluating as we continue the programmatic review process based on the early data findings that we have. So the first would be exploring a premier Mandarin program pipeline. And so some of this is specifically related to the securing of staff for Mandarin, but additionally the enrollment numbers and the interest right now actually could probably provide us with enough ample opportunity to be able to consolidate into one pipeline program and making that program really strong K through 12. So that is not something that we are necessarily saying will happen tomorrow. It's just something that we definitely would like to consider moving into the future of a consideration. I think the other thing that this will allow us to do is really make sure that we're keeping that pipeline strong. So one of the pieces of data that Ms. Stowe shared was really looking at the students that enroll and commit to 6 years in a dual language program. What happens to them when they transition into middle school? What does that look like? And for us, it's really important because there are so many great opportunities from credentialing to high school credits that students can earn in middle school should they pursue to continue the pipeline, that we really want to explore how do we make that stronger. And that goes into the transition to the last recommendation, which is that we believe that our dual language pipeline across the board has some growth opportunities, not only specifically in our Mandarin program, but we also would like to see that same thing happen in our Spanish program. So how do we increase enrollment for students that have committed 6 years to a dual language program to continue expanding their opportunities as they move into middle school? So again, we don't have any significant recommendations on that at this time, but as we're moving into the programmatic evaluation process for the next couple of years, those will be things that will be weighted very heavily.
Some of our next steps that we have already begun to do is when principals did their presentations, we opened up an engage page to answer any questions and kind of show the timeline and frequently asked questions that we have. Right now we have about 4 parents who have kind of voiced their questions to us that we are in the process of answering. Additionally, again, we got really great feedback, especially from our DLI programs, and we got things that we would like to improve on. So we're kind of looking at that data and figuring out what can we do at a district level, what can schools do at a school level, how can participate help, and then kind of putting those in silos and buckets so that we can really improve those programs. Lastly, what we want to continue to do is, again, do our programmatic reviews starting this spring and leading it into next school year. We will be looking at the International Baccalaureate program, our STEM program, our middle school dual language, and all of our high school academies. Dr. Kapicki alluded to this, but we do have our program choice and futures fair that are coming up next week. Our 8th graders for the 10th and 11th will be doing a futures fair day field trip to the arena. This provides a lot of equity for all of our students to be able to hear about all of our academies and early colleges, as well as our STEM schools. So we're really excited about that. So if you can come out, please do so from 10:15 till about 12:30. On October 16th, we are doing a futures fair. October 17th, the program choice window will open. That window opens from October 17th through December 15th. Also, all of our program choice schools from the elementary, middle, and high school levels will be having open houses. That information will be available on our websites, as well as we will have the information at our Futures Fair night. On December 15th, the program choice window closes, and then parents will be notified by February 1st of their selections.
So that concludes our presentation.
Board members, is there any discussion? Ms. Escobar?
Thank you so much for all your work, and I like to hear that you're talking to parents and getting feedback. For the parents in dual language immersion programs, clearly they have a lot to say. So now that your active surveys are gone, what's the best way for them to keep this conversation going? Because what I'm hearing is we're not merging programs right now.
No.
But people think we are.
Okay.
So we need to clarify that that's not happening. But if they have thoughts on that, or if they have ideas, or if they want to improve the program, or if they have thoughts about middle school, what's the best way to get in touch with you guys?
They can reach out to me directly. My information is on the Program Choice website. I have received a few emails and had some conversations with parents specifically surrounding the Mandarin program. And again, we are going to send out follow-up survey specifically for DLI for parents to kind of give some more feedback to us about the program and what's working and what's not working, so that we can try to move forward with those changes.
And I would just encourage that you open that up not just to elementary school parents, but also the middle school, because Roberta Road, I think parents over there are interested. And then just to clarify, people who want to apply for program choice, that when you say window open, that means you can apply October 17th, and you have until December 15th. You have 2 months to apply.
Yes.
When you ask us in January, it's too late. Right? So we just need to make it very clear. Applications will open October 17th and are open for only 2 months.
For 2 months, but I will say it is open for kindergarten parents only in March through April. So middle of March through April, kindergarten parents, when that window opens, they are able to reapply for any seats that we may have open.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Ms. Lindsay?
Thank you, guys, for the presentation. Again, I appreciate it. I'm like Ms. Escobar said, I'm thrilled that you guys are doing this in-depth research on the programmatic reviews and all of that. I'm just curious. So it's obvious that the language immersion programs are great for our children. They thrive in it. They do well in all areas. Is there any way for us to figure out why they do so well? Is it because their parents are very engaged in this, and they're obviously very academically minded because they're wanting to pursue other options language-wise? I wonder if we can harness this and figure out a way to see similar improvements in our education as a whole, rather than just in the language immersion program.
Yeah, absolutely. We do have some early infancy data, specifically around the national research around dual language. However, I definitely think it is worth doing some programmatic reviews specifically internally to track trends and patterns in that way. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Mr. Walter?
Yeah, thanks again for the presentation and looking at the data. I think that's important to see how successful our kids are performing in these programs. Just one, this is not a board decision, is that correct?
We're presenting to you our findings today, but this is not something that would have to be
It's not coming for the board to a vote.
Yes,
This is superintendent, and you guys would figure out what's best with our programs. Is that just to make clear? Because a lot of people think the board has a decision on these
Yeah,
things.
so what we're saying to you is if Sarah could go back to the slides with the decisions kind of made. These are our recommendations that we're going to be implementing for the 24-25 school year. So what we're saying to you tonight, and what we've been talking about, is this is what we will do when the 24-25 school year begins. This is what we're going to transition to based on these programmatic recommendations under Sarah and Heather's leadership.
Okay, thank you for making that clear. Are we losing any staff from these recommendations?
No, sir.
Okay, so no staff is being lost. That's good. And then my only comment was we're going through redistricting anyway, so part of Wolf Meadows' population may go to a different school. We don't know that, so it does make a little bit of sense that everybody's on the same calendar. So thank you.
Ms. Sandage?
Can you go back to the timeline for me, please?
Absolutely.
On October 9th, is that when you will have a public comment? And where will that be? What does that look like? How do people get involved, et cetera? I know it may be on the website, but if you could just help us understand, if these are the recommendations that will likely come, do you expect to hear something new from a public comment, or is it just, formation or what? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's okay. Great question. So we're saying is that October the 9th is when the regular business meeting will be for the board. And if people want to come and publicly comment on that they can on October the 9th for the board to hear that. And just pointing that out that, they always have an option to come and talk to our board.
I would also say, in conjunction with that, we do have our Engage page up on our website, and we've been actively monitoring that and responding to that. So that's an even better way for us to have interactions and two-way communication to address any misconceptions that may be there, but also to solicit community feedback.
And I did say this in our 2x2s, but maybe just thought about it a little differently. I'm really big on folks or children who have mental illness, and for the kids who are at the virtual academy because of that. Can you explain to me again what happens to those kids if a kid just cannot, because of anxiety or whatever have you, be in a traditional school setting?
Absolutely. That's a great question. So just the same way as we did prior to the virtual academy opening, as well as every other LEA across the state, we have a process specifically for homebound education through our 504 office. Our staff will work intentionally with those families to make sure that they are given the educational services they need to be able to support them academically. So we would rely on the exact same process that we always have prior to the virtual academy opening.
And just because I know in my world homebound means 5 hours a week, can you tell me how that differs from what they're receiving in current virtual academy and then homebound?
Absolutely.
Does that, I'm guessing it's not 5 hours, but again, in my world, 5 hours for homebound, being a case manager.
So
previously.
It depends on the circumstance and the individual situation with the student in terms of what their specific instructional plan is. However, in many cases right now, much of the coursework that students are engaging in through the virtual academy is actual asynchronous coursework, which is very similar. So when you're talking about 5 hours of instruction, that does not mean that students are engaged in 5 hours of instruction. That means the actual face-to-face time or the synchronous time that a child may have with an instructional facilitator. So depending on the circumstance, obviously that would not be vastly different from what they are getting at the virtual academy right now. And certainly I think it's important to follow the right process to make sure that we're tracking the needs of those students.
Thanks for the presentation and thanks for the clarity.
Absolutely.
Any other discussion, board members? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll move to 6.01 with our program choice enrollment and school performance calculation. Mr. Carl Sane. Welcome, Mr. Sane.
So if I may, before Carl starts, the program choice update that Mr. Sane is going to go over is kind of a review of what we've already talked a little bit about with the board and sent to the board. But we wanted to open that up again for questions, for clarification that the board may have based on the program choice numbers. As we pointed out to you, as required by policy, we are reporting this to the board, but I want to make sure that you understand the numbers, and if you have any question on that, please ask. And then Carl's then going to follow up with another presentation on our performance data. Again, I know the board is highly interested in the achievement data. I've had some great conversations with our board about the achievement data. I appreciate that. And again, I as I said to you before, I commend you for even taking an interest in this, because it is what we do. It's the most important stuff, and we do appreciate you and your questions. You need to continually sharpen the saw, and as you continue to ask us the questions, it makes us go back and have conversation to make sure we're focused on the things that will improve that achievement data. So I thank you for your interest in this. Mr. Sane?
Good evening, Madam Speaker, Dr. Kopicki, members of the board. As Dr. Kopicki mentioned, this is on the program choice enrollment and achievement data. I felt like this one made the most sense after hearing what we just heard about program choice, so some of this might be slightly redundant. CCS Board Policy 4154 requires several annual reports to be presented to the board. This presentation provides much of that information. There are a few points that will make more sense at other points in the school year. I'll show where that fits in this presentation. We've provided as much information as possible regarding current enrollment and then last year's achievement data, knowing that we may need a future update before this school year is completed. You can see what that policy outlines. I'm going to walk through parts A, B, C, and D on these slides. So Part A refers to the number and demographics of students currently enrolled in each program by grade level. So the next few slides will work through each of these programs. This first slide refers to our Fine Arts program, specifically at Royal Oak School of the Arts. The next slide refers to our dual language students in the Spanish and Mandarin programs. This is at Carl Fur Elementary, Rocky River Elementary, Winecoff, Wolf Meadow, and Irvin for our Spanish language immersion, and then our Mandarin at Harrisburg and Cox Mill. Next up, we have the number of students at our International Baccalaureate Elementary School at Weddington Hills Elementary. And then finally, the number and demographics of students at our STEM schools between R. Brown McAllister Elementary, Patriots, and Culture and Webb. Part B of this board policy refers to the aggregate student performance scores on state mandated tests and any other standardized test or measure used to evaluate students in each program. So what I've displayed here are all of the state required assessments. So the percent amplify are the number of students proficient on the amplify assessment. The percent reading, math, and science are the percent students that are proficient on those final end of grade assessments in reading, math, and science respectively. And then the final column is just our absent rate. We had an internal discussion and felt like that would be helpful to include as well. You can see this laid out by program. So each row represents the proficiency rates by program. The bottom row on this chart obviously shows students that are not engaged in one of our programs. Part C refers to the proportion of students that did not meet the program expectations and the number of students that left the program by grade level. So what these charts actually display are the percentage of students that were removed from that program.
On this particular slide, is it fair to say that most students that choose a program choice program stay in the program for the duration?
That would be fair. This specifically refers to the students that were removed from the program. It's difficult to pick out. We have some schools, some of our schools that have certain programs have transient student populations, so it would be difficult to determine which of those students are coming and going for programmatic reasons.
Thank you.
Finally, Part D refers to the student capacity by grade level, the number of applications received, the number of and the number of seats anticipated available for each program for the following school year. This presentation is going to focus on the number of applications received last school year and the student capacity for last year's new enrollees. We are currently in this process right now, as Ms. Reeves just referenced, with principals where they're going to help determine the next year's capacity, and so we don't necessarily have that data yet available. This would of course be determined by a number of factors such as current enrollment, enrollment from students in the community, class size restrictions, and of course teacher allotments. But the subsequent 3 slides will provide an overview of the number of applications received last year and the number of students enrolled in each program by grade level. So the first slide shows the number of students in elementary. So this is the number of new enrollees last year by grade level. To read this chart, on the far left, you can see the total number of students enrolled. The first column represents the number of students accepted into that program. So you can see, for instance, Culture and Webb had 376 students. There were 40 students accepted in the program out of 131 total applicants. To the right, you can see that by grade level. So you can see in kindergarten, Culture and Web had 28 students accepted out of 57 total applications. In first grade, there were 0 students accepted out of 12 applications, and so on. I've color-coded it by program type, so all of the STEM schools are together, IB, immersion programs, etc.
So, Carl, again, one of the big factors here would be capacity, correct?
That's
When
correct.
you're doing the acceptance rates, capacity is going to be your number one consideration because it's kids coming into a program from outside of that zone.
That's right. And you can see different acceptance rates depending on the school. So Beverly Hills had 7 applications and 6 of those students were accepted. Culture and Web had 57 applications and 28 were accepted. I'm
Thanks.
sure that had to do with capacity, but you can see differing levels by school based on the capacity levels. You can also see how it differed by grade level. So at Culture and Web, 0 first graders were accepted, presumably due to capacity, whereas 4 second graders were accepted. The next slide shows the same information for middle school programmatic decisions. Again, separated by STEM, IB, Spanish, Mandarin Immersion, Fine Arts, and the Virtual Academy. And then the final slide provides the high school data. Of course, the high school has all of the academy information, so it's a slightly different looking slide. Before I move on to our school performance grade conversation, are there any questions about this data?
Ms. Sandage?
So can you just break down, since we're talking about acceptance, how a child is accepted? If you could just walk us through briefly the application process, who selects these children, so that we can answer that question.
I may defer to Ms. Stowe. My part in this process was to put the data together. So sorry for speaking bluntly.
So there is an application process through Scribbles where parents, after they hopefully come to the program choice fair, will complete the application and select which schools they are interested in going to. Based off of that, then they will be accepted to specific schools where then they would have to make a decision on where they need to go. In working with Crystal on this, obviously this year is my first year working with program choice. Many of the students who wish to go to a specific school are able to. Obviously, schools like Rosa that are in high demand have more applications than they do have allotted seats. And so through that process, it is just a specific lottery. So it's not first come, first serve. You're able to, be accepted. So if you did your application on October 17th at 7 a.m., that does not guarantee that you are going to get a seat at Rosa. It is a random selection process.
And I will say it's important that we work with the Scribbles vendor on this entire process, so that it is very clear that it is a lottery process. Obviously, our first priority is to give as many seats as possible to those that are interested. We don't want to see wait lists. While it definitely is indicative of a successful, thriving program, anytime we have the opportunity to be able to try to provide seats for our families, we certainly wish to do so. Again, all of that is depictive of whatever the capacity of that school specifically is. So we're looking at both attendance in zone and attendance out of zone, also being mindful of transportation options for families.
Ms. Escobar?
And my follow-up question to that is, so if you're applying for, let's say, STEM, if you go to the slide before, for the elementary school, you're applying for a specific school with the STEM program. So if you were interested in STEM but you didn't get into Beverly Hills, you had to have applied to culture. You have to apply to each school separately, correct?
So it's based on your geographic area in which you live in. So that is, yes, so that is an excellent question. So when you go to our program choice application, depending on the geographic area in which you live, that is the drop-down choice of menus in terms of which school options you have available to you.
Okay.
And our website does have for each specific program choice school which schools are zoned, like which elementary schools kind of feed, or yes, which elementary schools feed into a middle school, what areas, if this is your home school, this is the program choice school that would be available to you based on STEM. That's really our multi-option as well as our dual language schools.
Okay.
So for example, Royal Oaks, everyone is going to have the option of Royal Oaks because we only have one fine arts magnet in the district. Does that make sense? So
Yeah,
if there's multiple programs, you would not apply to multiple STEM schools. You would apply to the one that is geographically within your home address.
Okay, because I was just thinking if realistically with program choice, you're still required to get your kid there. So even though geographically one is closer, if there was an opening at another elementary school that's 15 more minutes away, you would, if you're going to drive your kid, you would be willing to do it anyway. So I'm just, the demand, I don't know if that's being looked at. If some of these kids aren't getting in because there's too many at that one school, is it possible to switch it over? I don't know. I just think parents would be willing to drive further.
And that's a great point and part of our programmatic review process. So actually last week we were just talking about, are there other opportunities to open up seats to outside of the neighborhood students in cases where we believe that facilities has the capacity to do so. However, we want to be very intentional that we are currently working specifically with cooperative strategies. So we have to be very mindful of the future implications of any decision that we make where we're opening seats to outside of zone families, because very honestly, there's long-term implications of not just what we're doing this year, but for example, if we're opening at an elementary level, that is 6 years of long-term implications of not just one cohort of students, but a larger group. So all of those things are taken into mind, but we try to be very intentional about monitoring the numbers and specifically knowing that it's a random lottery process based on geographic area in which you live. You know, we're continuing to refine our practices as well and working with Scribbles to be able to support us in making sure that we have processes in place to be able to communicate with our families in a timely manner.
Ms. Sandage?
I did want to say, if a student is waitlisted for a particular program and someone chooses not to accept their seat, we do reach out to those families to let them know that there is a seat available, and if they choose to have their child go to the one that they had selected.
I was just going to say thank you for clarifying, and I apologize for stopping your presentation, but I think it's important for folks to know that what's happening to these folks that are applying. I think we need to know that, so thank you.
Okay.
So just before you move on, I just want to make sure that our board is clear as to these numbers and what this data means. If there are any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us to clarify anything further. So thank you, Carl.
Just the one quick question is, a student can apply for more than one of these program choice, so there might be duplicated applications in these numbers. Is that right? Okay. Thank you.
We ready to move on to school performance grade calculations?
Yes.
So more exciting math. So we talked about this briefly a month ago. A number of you guys had questions. I mentioned that I could get some data back to you regarding some of those questions. So I want to be able to provide a little bit more background. Obviously, I work with our school administrators, whether it's principals and assistant principals, on some of this information as well. So some of what I shared with them I thought would be relevant so that you guys could also understand the impact of some of these letter grades. So some of this is a quick review, and then I wanted to share again some perspective on what it really means to be an A school, how difficult it is to climb between different rungs of the ladder, and then again some validation that we've already seen from this school year about how the success in academics that our students are experiencing that is in line with what we saw from last year. So as a quick refresher, the school performance grades are broken up in K-8 versus in 9-12. In K-8, you can see the various achievement indicators. Keep in mind that achievement is weighted as 80% of the overall score. Growth is 20%. That's something that I'm going to focus on heavily today. A lot of times people hear 80-20 and they know that 80 is a bigger number, but I'm going to show you a visual in just a minute of exactly what the impact of that is as far as moving from a C school to a B school or to an A school. But in elementary and middle school, the EOG scores are what counts as that 80%. and additionally the English learner progress. So how many of our English learners either made adequate progress or exited that program entirely. In high school, what counts as that 80% are all of the EOC scores, also graduation rate, also English learner progress, math course rigor, and the ACT work keys assessment. So what I wanted to do was show a quick graph of how this plays out. So I've created a tool that will demonstrate briefly what this looks like for each of our schools. So on this tool you can see the A, B, C, D, F range of scores. So it's a 15-point scale. So to score an A, you've got to get 85 to 99 points. To score a B, those are schools that receive between a 70 and an 84. C's score between a 55 to 69. D score between a 40 and 54, and an F is anything from 0 to 39. I've set this tool up so that it's set, you can see on the left there's an achievement score and a growth score. The state's overall achievement last year was 53.6% proficient. The growth for the state is defined to be 0. We're always compared to the state average. So the average growth for the state means 0. That means anything above that number is you grew more than the state. Anything below 0 means you grew less than the state. So this would represent, if the state was a school, this would represent the state's score. 53.6% achievement with a growth score of 0 would give a letter grade of 57.88. So the state of North Carolina would have scored a 58, which is a C. I'm going to move those two sliders, and as I move the sliders, you'll see the green part is the achievement score moves, the blue part is the growth score moves, and the total composite is how high it moves on that graph. So if this hypothetical school wanted to move from a C to a B, I'm going to move the achievement, and as I make that slider move, you can see that the graph moves up, right? And that graph will move very high, and the graph will move very low based on achievement. But if this hypothetical school, which is a C school, tried to move to a B, they would need to move their achievement from a 53 all the way to a 70. So for perspective, many of our schools create a goal of 5 points of increased achievement. A 5-point achievement jump is a huge jump in achievement. That means 5% of your students that were not proficient are now becoming proficient. So to put in perspective, this hypothetical school needed a 17-point jump in achievement to move letter grades. The reason this is frustrating for schools is because you can move this achievement number, as you move the achievement number, you can see that the score is impacted significantly. As you move the growth number, you can see that the score moves hardly at all, right? And so a lot of our schools are focused on growth because growth means that our students are learning more than expected. But the growth measure really doesn't impact the school performance grade nearly as much as achievement. So I bring that up because I'm going to show a few slides that show we did have schools move from C's to B's or from B's to A's or from D's to C's. And it's really impressive work, and a lot of times when you see we had 3 schools move or we had 4 schools move, and I think a lot of times people don't often realize how much work went into that. Questions on this chart? All right, I'm going to go back to the presentation. Feel free, you can open that up and play around with it if you'd like. All right, so here's a chart that shows some of the movement that we had. The left-hand side are the school performance grades in 22-23. I believe I spoke in front of you in September and bragged about how good of a job we had done. We had we had 6 A schools, we had 9 B schools, 16 C schools, and 9 D schools. This year we went from 6 A schools to 9 A schools. Again, moving a letter grade. Now, if you're close to the letter grade, it could be that that's a minor movement, or it could be that you had to move quite a bit to make that move. But we had 6 A schools, and we went to 9. We had 15 A's and B's, and we went to 16 A's and B's. And then you can see the number of D schools decreased from 22-23 as several of them became C schools. Obviously, there's a lot of work on the work of our principals and administrators and teachers and students in a lot of these changes, and of course it means positive things are happening for kids. There were several questions about charter schools last time I spoke, so I wanted to give some perspective on how we compare to charters. So this was the exact slide that I shared with how we compare in Cabarrus County schools to the state of North Carolina. If you keep in mind, the blue dots represent the percent, each dot represents one percentage. So the blue dots represent percentages of our schools that were A. So you can see that we had 9 schools out of 42 that received an A grade. That would be 21% of the Cabarrus County schools received an A. The green represents B, yellow represents C, and so on. There's a lot more blue in Cabarrus County schools than there is across the state of North Carolina. And of course, there's a lot less orange and red than there are across the state of North Carolina. The question came up about how we compare to charter schools. So I created similar graphs for the charter schools. For perspective, we had 9 A schools out of 42 in Cabarrus County schools. Out of over 200 charters, there were only 12 A charter schools across the state of North Carolina. So we had the same proportions. Basically, your charter schools are very similar to the state of North Carolina. So we outperformed if you looked at the A schools, if you looked at the A and B, or if you looked at having less D and F schools. And then I've created the same graphs as if it was a bar graph. So this is the percent of schools classified as A. Keep in mind there were only 4 charter schools and Cabarrus County schools in the data set. So that may not be a heavy data set there. Likewise, I wanted to share the growth distribution. So the state of North Carolina is roughly 25% 25% exceeds growth, roughly 25% does not meet growth, and the other 50% is in the middle. The numbers are somewhere around there. It's actually closer to 29% exceeds growth, but you get the idea. Cabarrus County schools, almost half of Cabarrus County schools exceeded growth, which is a very impressive number, which is far out surpasses the state of North Carolina's. So again, I wanted to share how this compares to the charter schools across the entire state, in our region, and then within Cabarrus County. You can see again, the charter schools across the state are roughly proportional in nature to all other schools across the state of North Carolina. And then here's the bar graph. That's the same data presented a different way. So this is the percent of schools that exceeded growth. Last year, Cabarrus County over 40%, roughly twice the rate of charter schools in our region. And then finally, I thought I would share some data about how we've got some validation about how well our students are doing. We felt like this was really positive back in June. Obviously, we've started a new school year, and we've got some validation that says that our students are coming to school more prepared than other students across the nation or other students even pre-pandemic across America. So this first graphic, I want you to be able to understand how to read some of the other graphs, because there's going to be a lot going on in the other graphs. But the way iReady presents their data is the student at the middle or above their own grade level? Is the student early on that grade level? Is the student 1 grade level below? Is the student 2 grade levels below? Or is the student 3 or more grade levels below? So this is based on the iReady diagnostic that we just took. All students in K-5 will take this test in the first 3 weeks of school. Keep in mind, the students have not been engaged in math or reading across their grade level. So if a 3rd grader takes this test, they're being measured on 3rd grade skills. So the highest category of that means that they're already in the middle of 3rd grade. We haven't taught them any 3rd grade yet in reading or math. And then similar for light green, yellow means that 3rd grader is on a 2nd grade level, which is where you would expect most 3rd graders to be in August, right? Keep in mind this is the beginning of the year assessment. And so these numbers reflect all of K-5. I believe this was all of K-5 math. So 25% of our K-5 students in math are already on grade level, either mid. Yes, sir. Thank you. So what we're going to do is we're going to compare how does Cabarrus County do to how did the nation do in the fall of 23, and then also compare that to the national data set pre-COVID, pre-pandemic. So on each of these slides, you're not just going to see the one chart. You're going to see Cabarrus County Schools chart beside the national data set of 23 beside the national data set of 2019. Yes, sir. So on this slide, I think I've pulled 5th grade math for this specific example. On the far right, you can see Cabarrus County Schools students. We had 2,591 students in this data set. Nationally, the iReady data set had over 644,000 students from across America. In the 2019 data set, I have no idea how many students. I don't have access to the figure, the actual number. Again, green represents on grade level. The dark green means that they're already in the middle of that grade level Again, for the course that they are currently enrolled in, they haven't actually been exposed to that content by the teachers yet. So in Cabarrus County Schools in 5th grade, 19% were already in the middle of the grade level. Another 24% were on the early grade level. So 43% of Cabarrus County schools are either on or in the middle of grade level, which compares favorably to the rest of the country. So some quick math, 19 plus 24 is 43. The rest of the country, 8 plus 16 is only 24%.
Assessing where they are before they've actually taken that curriculum for that school year.
That's right.
At the beginning, I'm walking in 5th grade. I haven't taken any 5th grade math yet, but it's diagnosing what my ability set is at that moment in time at the beginning of the school year.
And that,
Teachers
that's right.
Assess that. Let me find out. But Ms. Hughes, would you comment on this and how you use this in your classroom? Oh, I'm sorry.
Seven of them kids.
Yeah, so I'm high school, so I'm not as familiar at the elementary level, but I know that the ability for the teachers in those grade levels to differentiate their students, to break down into small group instruction, and really offer the remediation and intervention skills necessary for the students that are maybe in the red shades or yellow compared to our green students. They may be able to offer extension opportunities to really kind of push their knowledge base so that they're not waiting or falling behind in any other skills. So it definitely offers an opportunity when teachers see that beginning of year data to allow for some type of differentiation so that the students are being instructed at a level that makes sense to them from where their starting point is.
Thank you.
And can I tag on to what Ms. Fugel says? The purpose of this data set is not typically to stand in front of you and tell us how great our kids are doing. The purpose of this data set is to be used by teachers for differentiation. Obviously, we use the end of year, end of grade results to really see kind of how did we do as a district. I just thought, there were some questions about how does our data from June look, and I felt like this at a quick snapshot validates our kids learned a lot last year. Our kids are in a pretty good space. Generally, there are students, unfortunately, in the pink and the red areas. The point of this assessment is to give the next steps for instruction for reading and math in kindergarten through 5th grade.
And
Mr. Walter?
This is a tool that Cabarrus County has that not all school districts may have because you pay for it.
That's correct.
So obviously it's a tool that's working, so it's making an impact. So thank you.
So I wanted to share how we're looking across each of our grade levels. This is specific to math. So what I really wanted to highlight on this, for one thing, you can see as the grades move across, we compare favorably to the 2019 pre-pandemic data set. We typically outperform the national average in 2023. But what I found interesting when I looked at this data is kindergarten and 1st grade, we look pretty close to average nationally. As kids advance through the Cabarrus County schools grade levels, by 4th and 5th grade, we typically far surpass the national expectation. Obviously, we don't necessarily know that all of those students stayed with us for those 5 years, but one interpretation could be that the longer kids are with Cabarrus County schools, the better we do on average compared to the rest of the nation, both in the amount of green that you see at the top, and we see more and more green than the rest of the country, and we see less and less red. And again, yellow, a student in yellow in August is not necessarily a bad thing. That means that kid, it could be that they're a grade level behind, or it could be that they're ready to learn this grade level content. Wanted to highlight the difference in the K1 data sets and the 4-5 data sets. And then here's the data for reading. You'll see it's a similar trend. Our students typically in kindergarten and 1st grade look pretty similar to the other data sets. As you advance through 4th and 5th grade, you see that we have a very positive effect on students in Cabarrus County schools, at least compared to the national average in 23, and again, far outpassing even the pre-pandemic data sets. And again, the point of this diagnostic is to really inform instruction. It's not necessarily to see how well we're doing, but I felt like it validated the data. And then the final piece I wanted to share is, the final piece I wanted to share is we can follow cohorts. Oh, I'm sorry.
I would have waited. So can you go back? I was just trying to understand. So second grade, it seems like they decrease third and then go back to the numbers from second grade. Has there been any thoughts around that or discussion around that?
Yeah, it's their data set is very interesting. I thought the same thing. Even nationally, it follows the same pattern. So I remember when we met with iReady, I met with them a year ago. I did not meet with them at the beginning of this school year as I typically would have. We had another team that worked on that. I asked them that question around third grade. Since it follows a national trend, it made me wonder a little bit about their norming process. It could have to do with the data set. We put a lot of really good teachers in third grade for whatever, because that's a read to achieve grade. I would, at this point, I'm hypothesizing. I'm really not sure, but our trend, you can see, kind of follows the national trend, if I'm understanding your question.
Yeah, you are. It just seems pretty weird.
Yeah.
But okay.
Yeah, no, you spot on. You're exactly right. I thought the same thing. The gap really tightens and then it expands again, but it's the same national trend. It made me wonder if it had to do with the way their test is normed. Yeah, second grade's not tested and third is. The final piece I wanted to share is we have our cohort. So this is not comparing Cabarrus County schools to any national trends at all. This compares Cabarrus County this year compared to last year compared to the year before. So you can see cohort by cohort. So on the far left in kindergarten, you see the kindergartners in 21-22, then you see the kindergartners in 22-23, and then you see the kindergartners in 23-24. So really, the kindergartners in 21-22 became first graders the following year, right? And then they became second graders the year after that. So for one, I would invite you to examine the cohorts as they move across time. So if you look specifically at the third graders in 21-22, who then became fourth graders in 22-23, and then fifth graders in 23-24, the students are coming back into the fall at greater and greater preparedness each year. And so again, you can see the magnitude of the work that we're doing. Our kids are coming back to us even more prepared than they were the previous year, which again, I feel like speaks to a significant amount of work by our teachers and staff. And of course, this only compares Cabarrus County school students to Cabarrus County school students, but you can see this is a consistent trend. So it didn't just happen this past year, it happened the year before that, and it happened the year before that. So I felt like this was worthy of sharing because it kind of validated some of what we saw, some of the positive trends from June.
But you're comparing our students each year longitudinally with national norms.
That's fair. Yes, sir. I just wanted to clarify that what the image on the screen no longer shows the national trends. That concludes my presentation on how school performance grades are calculated and some validation of the data from June. Does anybody have other follow-up questions?
Mr. Treadaway.
First of all, as someone who's colorblind, I appreciate the numbers embedded in the bar graphs. So our system statewide is on a 15-point scale. Who chose it? Who decided it was going to be a 15-point scale?
That's a great question. I can't remember if that's the General Assembly.
The General Assembly, I think, is the answer.
Yeah.
They're so wise.
Yeah, and so the 80% versus 20%, who decided that? The 80% proficiency versus 20% growth, who decided that?
Yeah, that would also be
the General Assembly.
That's right. So there is a conversation right now about changing some of these performance grade calculations. Obviously, it may be that they change the percentage, or it could be that they include a lot of other factors. But yes, as it stands right now, part of the reason for a potential change to that is when you look at the National Assessment for Educational Progress, for instance, we outperform Mississippi across the NAEP test. We outperform Florida across the NAEP test. But when you look at school performance grades, A, B, C, D, F, Florida has more A and B schools than we have. Mississippi has more A and B schools than we have, and that's just because of the way that the calculations are set up. So there's some movement and some traction towards making that change. It has not been state board approved yet. As it stands currently, I wanted to share, there's questions about, why can't schools move from a D to a C or from a C to a B? And that's a long road to hoe. So I want to applaud the schools that have been able to make that change, but I wanted to kind of give a little bit more background to what that 80 entails.
So can I stretch this for one more second? So if Mrs. Reeves and Dr. Bowers would come to the podium, please. Your interrogation will start now. So I don't want to put it up what I was looking at as you were talking. So we go through what we our annual review of the various buildings in the school system. Each principal has to come to us and give a presentation of their data, and they have to go over all of this. They have to go over the performance, they have to go over the growth, they have to go over what their goals are, and I won't put up because it's not in the presentation piece. I can share it with you at another time, but every principal comes and they present to a panel in front of them of their peers, and we review that information. So since Sarah's been appointed to the Chief Academic Office and Dr. Bowers he's in charge of Chief of School Performance and Auxiliary Services, one thing we've charged them with is tying together the school improvement plan with the academic data so that it makes sense. You're going to see, because it was last week that there was a deadline last week that they had to get the school improvement plans in.
Yes.
And I know over the next month we're finalizing that information to submit them to the state, and the board has to approve them. But you're going to see this time a lot of alignment, and we've worked very hard to align this data set, because the question becomes, and I've had great conversation with a lot of the board members and others, how do we improve? You know, are we saying, when you look at the data, are we saying kids can't read? Are we saying kids can't do math? Are we saying we're high performing, low performing? It gets confusing when you start looking at a lot of different data sets, but what I can tell you is this. The first thing I want to say is you have phenomenal teachers, and you can't miss that. What I want to say to people is don't get lost in the data and forget that there are human beings behind these numbers, meaning there are teachers and kids behind these numbers, and we are in classrooms every day. And we actually talked about this today in our cabinet session about being more present in classrooms to support teachers and support principals through observations. But you have outstanding teachers in Cabarrus County system. We can never forget that. We really do have phenomenal teachers, and I see with my own eyes the many ways that they help our kids. And it's more than just teaching them reading and math. It's making sure they're safe, making sure that we're building their confidence, making sure that we're building their self-esteem, making sure that we're, in your K1, 2, building their gross motor skills, making sure that we're finding out what skill sets are they interested in, what's their passion, what are they chasing after, making sure they're socially, emotionally whole. So much goes into this, and I think we lose, I'm not saying anyone in the room, but sometimes we lose the focus of what really matters. This is important. It's very important, and achievement is something we should always be looking at and cognizant of. But there are a lot of other factors that go into those successful schools I've talked to, and our teachers just do a phenomenal job at that. So I would just ask Sarah and Dr. Bowers very quickly to kind of just talk real briefly about what that looks like in terms of where we are in terms of the school improvement plan process, and what your thoughts were, Sarah, on the data reviews that we did.
Yes, no, thank you for that opportunity, and good evening, members of the board. Really, this goes back to the work, as I presented last time back in the month of September, that really began over the summer. This was intentional. It was an effort to be able to give schools protected time, to be able to come together as professionals, to come together as educators, to come together as learners, and to really focus on what would be the intentionality behind planning for their upcoming school year. They had their teams in place at summer leadership. And to be able to sit and to be able to have the data that's available from Mr. Sane and his team, because they do a phenomenal job of outfitting schools with not only data, but also some planning tools and some things that are well more advanced than what I could provide. I was impressed by the Desmos calculation there. So you get a sense of what our leaders certainly have at their fingertips, and it's a one-stop shop that's available. Having been a principal in another district and having served, I'm amazed at the resources that our leaders have access to, and just and a board that is willing to allow for that and to provide that, so that they have the data to really now make some decisions and conversations around how they're going to drive their school improvement efforts. So going back to June, that time was allowed for over multiple days to be able to think strategically about how they're going to approach this upcoming year, and I think I shared the framework with the board as well. What is our continuous and framework model? And had some great discussion today about how we're going to continue to emphasize that and message that and brand that and bring it to the forefront of what we do, not only for school improvement planning, but just in terms of an organization as a public education system. So really that's at the heart of how we should operate. And so when they use that framework and have some guidelines in place and some parameters, and you give the safe space, you can see some wonderful things happen. And that's where these goals now started to emerge. And through the summer, they refined that, they revised that, and they were able to work with their team such that when they came back in August, they were able to be very intentional, very specific, and very targeted with what would be needed for their respective buildings to be able to drive improvement for learners. And one of the things we always said is our goals should be student-driven goals. It should be about what we want the kids to be able to do and how we as adults are going to support them in that endeavor. And so that really became, again, that's the template from which we operate. And so everything we will ask and everything we visit and everything that we pursue this year will go back to that school improvement plan, because we want to ensure those goals were aligned with what the district strategic priorities are. And when we look at our district strategic priorities, we can clearly see how they are aligned with the State Board of Education strategic priorities and the portrait of a graduate. And these things which we know are going to give us a bit of a North Star, if you will, as we navigate this journey together. And so that's set in motion what we're going to be these data reviews, beginning of year review sessions with principals and leaders at the beginning of the year. And I'll turn it over to Ms. Reeves to talk about that.
Absolutely. So the other thing that we've been very intentional about is a cross-departmental effort across central office staff to make sure that everything that we are doing is working in conjunction with our schools, making sure that we are looking at their continuous school improvement plans, looking at their specific SMART goals, which is really specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely goals to say, okay, if you have benchmarked that your proficiency is going to be at X by the end of the year, what are some of the strategies that you firmly believe, based on your comprehensive needs assessment or the needs assessment that you completed with your leadership team, you need in order to make that happen? Because our job is to work in service of you. So is there professional development? Are there learning walks? Do you need specific members of our specialists or our central office staff to be able to deploy to your schools to be able to support you in these efforts? And so there's intentionality in making sure that whatever key action items are aligned with our key initiatives, and that we're going back and saying, if you have a CAT professional development day where students aren't in school, how are we providing you the best high quality professional development to make sure that our phenomenal teachers have the skill set that they need to be able to reach those goals by the end of the year? And then specifically, how are we going back and monitoring that progress consistently? So working in conjunction with our assistant superintendents to say, just the same way that our students are not one size fits all, our schools are not one size fits all. So the way that we provide differentiated support has to be targeted and intentional. And so we're actually going to be coming back to you in November and December specifically with targeted support plans for our schools, so that you can actually see the varied ways that we support each of our schools depending on their school performance, as well as the growth data, and using those data decision rules to say, we all know that different school populations need different things, and so intentionally looking at that through the lens of school improvement, so that while this is one snapshot of the data, we're using that data to drive and inform practices to improve outcomes for students.
And so I just want to I'm trying to tie this together. But what I would say to the board is, please keep asking us about please keep asking us about the achievement, the growth data, the performance data, questions about direct connections to the classroom. And I would say to all of us, when we see the teachers out there, thank them for the hard work that they put in, and our administrators as well. So if you have any questions, I'll sit back and please ask anyone that you see here.
Ms. Escobar.
Thank you for all of that, all three of you. We really appreciate you. And I just want to make sure that our administrators, our schools principals, a lot of them I think are new. And I think that's our assistant principals as well. And so we want to set up a system for them so that they can succeed, because if they succeed, then their teachers will succeed. So I appreciate that you're talking about having these conversations about supporting them from this office to the schools, but just recognize the fact that some of them, this is all new to them, and I want them to know that we support them, and we want to do everything we can. It's not us putting a microscope and saying you're doing something wrong. It's more about how can we support you so that our kids can do well, because, well, frankly, I want them to stay. I want our teachers to stay. We're recruiting, and we're getting great teachers, and we're getting great administrators, but it's competitive out there. And so I want them to love to work for Cabarrus County Schools. They're doing a great job, and obviously we want accountability, but I just hope that we keep that in mind, that there's so many new people, and we have high standards, but we want to empower them to be successful. It's not about pushing them down. If anything, it's lifting them up. The whole RISE thing that you guys did, but I just really want to make them hear that we really do care about them and we want to be supportive of them.
And the board just recently helped us with that because in the last month you followed through on a recommendation where we hired someone to specifically work with professional development or principals and develop those models, especially with to your point, the knowledge that a lot of our folks are new. We need to make sure that we're educating them to the processes, practices, protocols, routines, etc. in Cabarrus County. So thank you.
Ms. Sandage.
I thank the three of you for, holding us accountable as a district and making sure that we have what we need and presenting that information to the board. I do have a question. Were there any other outliers that made you just think, like, what is happening here, and made you ask questions, and what were the answers to those questions if that occurred?
I mean, there are absolutely some varied opportunities, right? When I look at, I think in the last presentation, I shared some of the highlights, and in this presentation, obviously, we saw that there were some schools that moved from B's to A's, or that moved from D's to C's, but then there were obviously some that did not. I did want to share, obviously, it's a challenge to move across grade levels, so I was trying to highlight that there are absolutely opportunities for growth. I want to reiterate what Ms. Reeves and Dr. Bowers referenced. We're meeting with every school to talk about their strengths and weaknesses and opportunities. They're bringing the data to us and discussing plans. As referenced, every school's got a student wellness goal. Every student's got an academic goal. We're going to be able to track those goals throughout the year, give feedback, give support. There are absolutely opportunities. The general picture is that things are moving in a very positive direction from pre-pandemic. But there are absolutely opportunities either at specific schools or with specific subgroups. We have that data. We're having conversations around it. Student services is involved. So for instance, Dr. Roth's team in student services looks at student subgroup demographics for students with disabilities with our English language learners. And then of course we look at that not just holistically, but we're going to have a data dive with elementary schools next month where we look at students with disabilities at every single school individually, and we talk about what are the strengths and weaknesses and opportunities, because it is a brand new school year, right? And it could be the case that we have other pockets that didn't necessarily play out positively.
Yeah, that's good to know. That wasn't what I was referring to. I'm talking about where there were things that, like, something may be wrong with the data or how it's being put on paper, if you will. That's what I was trying to. But that's good to know that you what you're doing.
I'm trying to think. I mean, we talked. It's interesting how when we had a conversation this morning in cabinet, sometimes you see one data point and it gives you pause, and then you see another data point that says maybe we might have seen it a different way. So for instance, Math 1, typically people tend to ask questions. Why is Math 1 proficiency so low? Well, in high school, Math 1 might have showed the best growth out of any of the tested subjects at over almost 4 points of growth. So it's one of those where sometimes you see one data point and you think, man, I wish that achievement was higher, but it actually turns out we did something better. Probably the two biggest places we had conversations in cabinet were Math 1 and then K through 8th science. And both of those were blue and showed growth, exceeded growth. So there were certainly pockets of things that we'll look into. I don't know that there was one consistent concern broadly at a district level. That was, I mean, and I looked at ACT, I looked at work keys, I looked at every factor under the sun, and we were, in the top 20 in most things. There were some places where we were average. So we were excellent at exiting our learners. We're pretty average at showing progress with them. And those are all things that I've shared internally. Yes.
Mr. Floyd.
I just want to say, and thank you everybody for the presentation again. It's very good. I just want to say I really like how we've set up the school improvement teams and how we engage the teachers and the administrators and asking them what they need and where they feel like they are. I had parent-teacher conference with my son's teacher today, and she set it up and said, look, here's where the test says he is, but here's where I think he is. And to be honest, she's been doing this 22 years, and she was his first grade teacher too, so I feel like she has a pretty better handle on it than a test. So I like that they have a stake in the game and can kind of have their hand in their own destiny. So thank you for that, and appreciate the support. This is really speaks to great work from our teachers, and we are very, very lucky to have the ones we have.
Any other questions, board members? Okay, thank you so much. Okay, board members, we'll move to 7.01. These are our consent or action items, policies for approval on second reading, and we'll have Dr. Sandy Ward. Good evening, Dr. Ward.
Good evening. How are you this evening? So tonight we are re-bringing up policy 2342, which is focused on voting methods. I know we discussed it a little bit last month. There was a little bit confusion as if we were going to accept it on first read or if we're bringing it back. So I want to first know if there are any questions about policy 2342 from the group.
Any questions? Any further discussion about this? Mr. Walter, anything?
I mean, I think it's straightforward. The only thing I didn't see is we didn't talk about it in the policy committee, right? We did not talk about it in the policy committee.
No, we didn't. We
Just to make sure the board's aware of that we're
correct.
approving it on second read without a committee review.
Correct.
Okay, board members, since there is no other comments about this, I'm going to need a motion to approve policy 2342 as presented.
So moved. Second.
So I have a motion by Mr. Floyd, a second by Ms. Lindsay. All those in favor of approving 2342 as presented, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay. Thank you very much. We'll move to 7.02 in our proposed calendars for 2024-25.
Great. So I am here to present the calendars this evening, but first I want to say, if no one has said it, to our viewing audience and to our principals, happy Principals Month. This is October, and as you all alluded to, it takes a very strong leader to get the results that Carl is showing that we are getting. So please take some time and acknowledge the work of our school principals. Just coming from out of school, I know that's a pretty big deal. All right, so good evening, board members. I'm going to present to you tonight a calendar that supports the approved calendar from the 23-24 year, which is this current year. I'm also going to include traditional schools calendar and calendar for our 3 early colleges. But before diving into the presentation, I want to say thank you to the Cabarrus County Schools Calendar Committee, of which we have Ms. Lindsay and Ms. Escobar representing from the board. We have members from senior leadership, which is our cabinet members. We have principals from each of the 3 levels, parents from each of the 3 levels, and teachers from each of the 3 levels. So all of us got together. We met, I believe, 4 times to really kind of dive into it and come up with a calendar that we can present to you this evening. But it is wrapped around the parameters that you all gave us, right? So some required criteria that guided us as we crafted this calendar. As you can see on the screen, there are some time requirements that we have to abide by. The law says the school year needs to cover 9 months. The Cabarrus County Schools calendar that's going to be shown today covers actually 10 months, so we're good there. The Cabarrus County Schools, we could either look at 185 school days, or we can opt for 1,025 instructional hours. It has been our practice these last few years to opt for the 1,025 hours. Okay, so that's what we're doing there. For our 10th month staff, when they come back, from the first day they come back to the day that they leave, there has to be 215 work days that we are working with. Okay, so I wanted to kind of give some background around there. Next slide. So you'll notice that this calendar really closely resembles this current year's calendar, the 23-24 calendar. Our committee's top priority lay in strategically scheduling what we call capped or required work days versus optional work days for staff members. We placed a very strong emphasis on ensuring that the necessary professional development was in place to ensure the delivery of high quality instruction. So just like a lesson plan for a teacher, the calendar is like a lesson plan for all of us. We put it all out there, we pace it out, and we make sure that we are doing things that we need to do at the time that we're supposed to do them. So some points of interest from this first calendar, which is the traditional calendar. There are 88 days in both semester 1 and 2 for a grand total of 1,060 instructional hours, which is well above the required 1,025 hours. We have also set aside, it's not here on this calendar, 1 day per semester. So if DPI or General Assembly kind of throws an initiative at us at the last minute, kind of like letters a couple of years ago, and we weren't really prepared for it, we set aside a day in November, first semester, and I believe in February, second semester, so we can kind of make up for that if that happens. I'm not saying it will, but we wanted to be prepared. Any questions on the traditional calendar?
So Sandy, I have no questions, but you and I spoke earlier, and we've gotten some feedback on the beginning of the school year. So one of the things we talked a lot about is capped and uncapped. For those of you, and if I do not say this correctly, please correct me, the capped days are mandatory days that we need all staff in session. They have to be here. There's not a lot of flexibility for our principals to do much with those days other than what we decide is going to take place, and we strongly suggest our teachers cannot take those days off. The uncapped days give both our principals and our teachers a little more flexibility in terms of how they assign the work in their various buildings. Keeping in the back of your mind, we have 45 different schools in the Cabarrus County school system right now and growing. It also gives our teachers some flexibility to use perhaps some compensatory days that they have as well. And there was some time that Dr. Ward and John LeGrand and others who, I know Dr. Arbach was involved in this, Tara Butch was involved in it, Rebecca Phillips, and a lot of our teachers in trying to lay this out a little differently. And I also talked with our board member Sam Treadway and our board chair Denise Adcock about some of the things that in this calendar and some of the history that Sam was able to provide. Kind of had us go back and take a look at it again with our principals. One of the things that we're going to recommend that we change tonight to our board, as you see it, is August 1st and 2nd is going to be our rise. That's going to be mandatory. We want all of our folks here, obviously, for that, because they're two huge professional development days that we do. But we felt after a lot of discussion and some consternation that August 5th, 6th, and 7th can be uncapped days and put the ability back into the principal's discretion on whether or not they want to cap those days or not. So August 5th, 6th, and 7th, our recommendation is going to be to the board. Where you see blue, we will change those colors to the color that identifies to the uncapped planning development days, which would be green. Okay, thank you. So again, August 5th, 6th, and 7th, we're going to give that discretion back to our principals to decide. They'll be uncapped, and our principals will decide how they use those. If our principals want to cap them, they can. If they want to uncap them, that's up to them as well. But we're going to make them uncapped and leave that discretion back to our principals and move from there. So that's one change that happened actually late today that we after a lot of discussion. And actually, going back, and I got to credit Dr. Ward. She went back about 15 years and looked at a lot of different calendars pretty quick and uncovered a lot of history. So we were digging into this right up until about 5 to 6 this evening. So I appreciate her work, and I appreciate Mr. Treadaway's insights and Denise Adcock, our chair, for kind of pushing us a little bit on this. So I thank you for that.
Sure. You want to scroll up to the next calendar? Okay, so now we have an early college calendar. So normally the two early colleges that are affiliated with GROAN would kind of do the same calendar, and then the early college high school that's affiliated with the Cabarrus Health Science would do their own calendar. This year, the three principals got together and they created and are recommending a calendar that is the same across the board, which I think is amazing. We don't have kids out on different times just because they're with the RCC group as opposed to the Cabarrus Health Science group. So I really do think that that is a wonderful thing. There are 88 days in their first semester and 86 in the second semester, with a grand total of 1,122 hours. And we'd like to point out that spring break for all of our early colleges matches the spring break of the traditional calendar, which is also great for families. You know, it really encourages family time. And we're not operating on different schedules. And so we put a lot of hard work into it. We did ask our principals for feedback at our last meeting. They were able to, some of them were able to get back to their school improvement teams for some feedback. We also allowed our cabinet to weigh in before we are presenting to you today. So we are presenting for your, I don't know what the next steps are.
Okay, so since we're making changes to that one calendar, does that one particular calendar need to go on action item for the next meeting, or can they both be on consent? Mr. Middlebrooks?
If the board wants them, with that explanation, with that one change, if the board wants them on the consent agenda, it can choose to do so.
Okay, board members, does everybody agree to put that under, both calendars under consent?
No.
Okay, Mr. Wald.
We're modifying calendars. We haven't had any public input. I would like to have the public to have an opportunity to talk about our calendars before we vote on them, number one. And number two, this is still a calendar that's an early start calendar, right? So it's not consistent with whatever the law was, but it's in the best interest of students here in Cabarrus County.
That's right.
And they get their summer back, right? So they have a full summer again. So we took 2 weeks this past year, they get that back.
Get it back, yep.
On this summer. My comment on it, and I've said this before, I don't like the November election day as a cap day. I want our teachers and staff to be able to participate in the election process, support a candidate if they want to, but certainly to go vote. I think it's critical. So I don't like to see that capped. I would rather it not be an uncapped day. So those are my opinions, but I do want to see this on action. Thank you.
Ms. Sanded.
I just wanted to see if our teacher liaison had any thoughts on the calendar, if you so, please.
I was not a part of the conversation, so I'm not totally sure, but going back to the suggestion of moving the August 5th, 6th, and 7th to uncapped, I think it's on the other calendar tab, the traditional calendar. And leaving that up to the principal discretion, I would just look for some guidance and equity for all of the schools to offer what that looks like. I know that some teachers, really need to be in the schools, and some teachers can afford to take a day if they've earned a day. But right there at the start of the school year, making it mandatory at one school that teachers are there and not mandatory at another school, it adds a little bit of a divide. And then my suggestion too is to look at, well, we have open houses prior to school starting, and so what does that look like in preparation for teachers getting prepared for those classrooms and those families to enter? That's definitely a concern. I do appreciate, though, sticking to the calendar of the early start and the finishing exams before Christmas. All of that is great, and I know that it aligns with some of the holidays and the end of marking periods. So that was my only concern.
Okay.
Thank you. The other thing that I wanted to ask was about the board meeting that occurs on open house that has happened for the last 2 years. I don't know if that'll be the case and if we've looked at that, but I would appreciate if we did.
Any other questions? Okay, so it sounds like we need to put the traditional calendar on action, and we can consent to the early college calendars.
I'd like to hear public input on either calendar. Let folks talk and share their opinion with us before we vote on these.
Can I ask Mr. Walter, we've both been on the policy committee, but for calendar, what has that looked like when you say you want the public to be able to have an opinion?
Oh, we have public comment next month. Every month
Gotcha.
the board has comment sections, so we invite the public to speak on whatever topic might be on their mind.
Gotcha.
And this would be one of those topics.
Sounds good. Just wanted to know if I needed to schedule a meeting.
Okay, board members, is everybody in agreement to put both calendars on the action item for our October 9th business session? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move to 7.03 with Hickory Ridge High School track contract and the Central Cabarrus High School track.
Yes, ma'am. Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board, Dr. Kopicki. So, at your pleasure, Madam Chair, I would like to kind of speak in conjunction with both 7.03 and 7.04. If there's no objection.
No objection.
So these are very similar contracts that I'm bringing before you tonight. These are the track improvement contracts with Geosurfaces Southeast for Central Cabarrus High School and for Hickory Ridge High School. Both these projects were part of the PAYGO-funded approved budget by Cabarrus County this year. The Central Cabarrus High School track is a contract in the amount of $627,800, and the Hickory Ridge High School track is in the amount of $597,000. And both contracts are well within the budgets that were approved. And I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions, board members? Mr. Walter?
So these were bid, this is a bid?
These contracts were awarded using the interlocal purchasing agreement cooperative contract system.
So why the difference in the two prices?
Do what?
There's a difference of $30,000 in the prices?
Well, they're two different style tracks. The scope of work is a little slightly different for the two of them.
Explain to us what that is. What's the difference?
Well, Central Cabarrus High School is a 6-lane track, but does not have some of the elements that were already a part of the approved turf field scope of work that we did at Hickory Ridge High School. So we had to add those elements into the Central Cabarrus High School project. So it made it a little bit higher.
Okay. And we've worked with this vendor before. We're okay with it?
Yes, sir. They've done all of our turf field improvements and our track improvements.
Thank you, Brian.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions? Is everybody in agreement to put this on the consent agenda for the October 9th business session?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll move to 7.05, our HVAC proposal approval with Mr. Chuck Taylor. Good evening, Mr. Taylor.
Good evening, board members, Madam Chair, Dr. Kopicki. I'm here to ask you to approve the proposals for designing and construction management of the HVAC replacements at Concord High School and Weddington Hills. Concord High School is in the amount of $820,200 and Weddington Hills is $585,260.
Are there any questions, board members, about the contracts? Mr. Walter?
Yeah, I looked at this. I actually thought this was actually for the replacement of these items, but actually it's just a piece of paper that we're paying quite a bit of money for.
Actually, it's more than that, sir. It's the piece of paper that you're talking about, the design work. It's also all the investigation into the facilities as far as the demolition that'll have to occur. It also is the construction administration and bidding process. They're going to take care of that for us. That's in the initial fee on each one of these two sheets. The second one that says additional project management services, because these projects are so big, the scope is so complicated, I expect it's going to take more than 2 years. What we're asking you to approve right now are the first 2 years' expenses. At the completion of the project, we're going to do commissioning services. That's an additional fee at the bottom. If you'll notice, for Concord High School, I believe it is $129,500, and for Weddington Hills, it's $94,000. What this does for us is front to back ensuring that everything works. There are no scope gaps that have occurred. There's no faulty equipment. 5 years ago, I wouldn't have asked you for this. But today, because of the state of the economy, manufacturing, everything we're going through, we have to protect the taxpayers' dollars, and this is a critical need to spend these dollars to ensure that for the next 40 years, we're going to get our money out of this.
Okay, I just hadn't seen us do it before, like you just mentioned, and it's just an awful lot of money. So I'd like to see it on action. I'd like to think about it some more, evaluate it a little bit more. Thanks.
Any other questions, board members?
I'm sorry, just a question. Can you compare this paper to something else? Like, for example, if I'm getting ready to buy a house, I'm going to have somebody go look at it and inspect it before I buy the house to make sure there's no things in there that it shouldn't be. Is this similar to that?
Kind of. This is a lot more in-depth and detailed. What this is we're paying engineers to go in and design a completely new, up-to-date, up-to-code HVAC system to modernize these schools. Okay, this is replacing everything from the piping to the air handler units that are moving the air, to the chiller plant, the controls, the VAV boxes, which is what most teachers complain about because they want the temperature up or down. It's just bringing everything up to date, but it's also the design work of it as well. It's the complete scope of going in, so it's actually a lot more detailed than a home inspection.
So, like, poly B piping is like not good, but it was good at some point. These folks are going to make sure that that doesn't happen.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, we will put this on the action items for
Ma'am, could I just make one comment?
Sure.
I just want to thank all the board members that came to the facilities maintenance celebration and everyone that wished us well that could not be there. It was a great celebration, and those of you that came, give everybody that didn't a hard time so that next time everybody shows up. Thank you.
Food was outstanding, and
It was good.
hats off to your staff too.
Thank you.
It was a great event.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Okay, board members, we will move to 8.01, which is our call for a motion to convene in closed session. To consult with an attorney and preserve the attorney-client privilege pursuant to General Statute 143, 318, 11A3, including the cases involving the following parties: KMK, Quinones, Wanish, Beyonde, and to consider confidential personnel matters pursuant to General Statute 143, 318, 11A6.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion by Mr. Floyd, a second by Ms. Escobar. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? We are now in closed session. Thank you, everyone.